Hey everybody, coming at you today with sprite chart number 4. This one covers a huge chunk of time, about 100 years. Going to cover the period from 1715 to 1815. This video is going to include three huge movements: the Enlightenment, the start of the Industrial Revolution, and the French Revolution. Now in class we took these as three different units, and we're going to continue the Industrial Revolution into the next sprite chart, but I've taken a chronological approach to this in the hopes of trying to get you guys to see sort of how some of these timelines mesh. So we're going to take care of the sprite chart. We're going to do a little bit of the 18th century recap. Chosen to start at 1715 because that is the death of Louis XIV, and so that sort of marks the end of the age of absolutism and intro into this new Enlightenment phase. That's not to say that absolute monarchy is out. We know very well that it sticks around for a really long time, but this sort of 1715 is sort of the end of an era. In 1815, this is the year that Napoleon is ousted from France, and so also seen as the end of an era. And besides, a lot of this stuff kind of meshes together. Here, let's take a look. So these sprite charts, remember, cover social, political, religious, intellectual, technological, and economic categories. These are great for comparing different time periods, great for contextualization on the DBQ. So you're going to need to write these down. You can either use the PDF that I put on Classroom, or you can use your own pieces of notebook paper, whatever works best for you. Just understand that the different boxes on the chart are different sizes for each sprite chart. And again, these should be out in front of you on your desk when you take that exam on May 13th at 4 p.m. All right, let's get down to it. So as far as social history goes, we still got the old regime, but we're going to transition during this time period out of the old regime, out of the ancien regime, and into the new class system. You can see the absolute breakdown of the three estates, as illustrated by the French Revolution, and a lot of this is caused by ideas of the Enlightenment. But we also just see that the bourgeoisie are rising, and they're beginning to achieve wealth equality with the nobility, and they want to be recognized for this as a group. They probably don't really understand themselves as a group, but they understand individually that they have reached parity with the nobility in a lot of different ways. You see intermarriage between the bourgeois and the nobility, as these nobles want the money of the bourgeoisie, and the bourgeoisie want the titles and the privileges of the nobility. And you can see middle-class people just straight up buying titles as they trade money for prestige and money for privilege. And these nobles who have gotten used to a pretty decent style of life want the money, and so they're willing to give up being the Duke of whatever in order to get a ton of money in return for transferring that title to a middle-class person. In France, we know that the middle class are taxed unequally. We know that across the board, the nobility look down on these bourgeoisie. They see them as having made their money in the filthy world of business, as opposed to the much more noble way of making money, which is charging rent on your peasants. And so socially they're looked down on, but economically these nobles are very willing to look the other way and make a deal. Peasants across the board, across Europe, are bearing the brunt of taxation, and so the vast burden of the money being spent by these countries comes from the poorest people. As far as women are concerned, remember, they are not included in the Enlightenment. All this talk about rights and equality does not apply to women as far as these Enlightenment thinkers go, these philosophes. They do achieve a brief glimpse of equality in France at the very beginning of the revolution. You can look at something like the March of the Fish Ladies, the Facade, who go to Versailles to bring Louis back. But that doesn't last very long. The women's groups, remember, are eventually made illegal for the radical phase of the revolution. And during the reign of Napoleon, you could even say that the rights of women actually go backward and are worse than they were under Louis XVI. And then you've got this phenomenon of urbanization. More and more people are being born, especially in the countryside. There aren't enough jobs in the countryside. These people move to the cities. We talked about the drop in local controls over people. And so men and women meet up in the city, they get together, the woman gets pregnant, and the man simply leaves. And so the woman is then forced to raise this child either on her own or to take this child to an orphanage or to commit infanticide. And so what we call this is the illegitimacy explosion. And it occurs mostly in Western Europe because remember in Eastern Europe they still have serfdom. And so there are still community controls over men and women because the people aren't leaving to go to towns and cities because that's illegal. And so I put that here at the bottom because it definitely fits into this time period. It's something that's going to continue from about 1750 to about 1850. Politically speaking, there are three big things to talk about. Number one, we have the first age of empire. This is where the Europeans go out and they take over the Americas, and this is the time period when Britain is starting to win everything. Britain wins imperial wars against Spain. They win imperial wars against France. Quite notably, the 7 Years' War gives Britain North America, the Caribbean islands, and India from France. Britain loses the War of the American Independence. Obviously, that's why we are a country, but it does maintain the rest of its empire. By winning these wars against Spain, they win the right to trade with Spanish colonies in this area. And so Britain is rising on a global stage, while many of the rest of these European countries are stuck staring just at Europe. Britain is expanding well beyond the horizons of Europe. Number two, we got enlightened absolutism. This is that funny little quirk that occurs in the middle 1700s. Generally, the enlightened absolutists are Frederick the Great in Prussia, Catherine the Great in Russia, Joseph II of Austria. Some people would put in Louis XV in France. It's debatable. But generally, they utilize Enlightenment ideas of reason to streamline the bureaucracy and continue to centralize power and to become all-powerful themselves. They talk a good game about Enlightenment freedoms, but oftentimes there are two things that hold them back. Number one is their own nobility. Many of these, all three of these Central and Eastern European absolutists are going to talk about freeing the serfs. Joseph II of Austria actually does it, but remember his brother, after Joseph dies, reverses that. And this is generally, these monarchs can't abolish serfdom because it would undermine their nobility, and their nobles are the base of their own support. And so they can't undermine their nobles. Secondly, they take limited action as far as freedoms are concerned because they want to protect their own reputation. And so they continue to restrict freedom of speech, freedom of thought, freedom of the press, freedom of religion, because they want to continue to have that control in their own hands. And they don't want people talking badly about them and talking them down to the people of their country. And so these enlightened absolutists talk a good game, they do some enlightened ideas, but as far as the freedoms of the Enlightenment are concerned, not so much. The last big thing is, of course, the French Revolution. The French Revolution happens at the end of this time period from 1789 to 1815. And it looms large as the culmination of the Enlightenment, the culmination of a lot of these ideas, these humanist ideas out of the Renaissance. But it also then leads into the 19th century, and so it is sort of the dead center of this course for a reason. It's seen as the fruits of everything that has come before, and the roots of so many things that happened after. So as far as the causes of the French Revolution, like I said, we can go all the way back to like the Renaissance, to humanism, to skepticism. We're going to go back to France needing money. France is bankrupt; it needs cash. Louis XVI asks the nobility, hey, can we have a loan? The nobles see this as an opportunity for them to gain more power for themselves, and so they force the king to call the Estates General, or the Estates Generale, however you want to call it. During the process of calling the Estates Generale, the bourgeoisie sort of crystallize and begin to see themselves as the leaders of the Third Estate. And when the third estate gets snubbed at the Estates Generales, the bourgeois decide this is the moment. This is the moment to revolt. And so we have a four-stage revolution. The first phase is this initial revolution, this initial revolt of the bourgeoisie. This is called the moderate phase. This is the one where the bourgeoisie of the Third Estate, of the Estates Generales, want to establish a constitutional monarchy, with Louis XVI as the executive branch and themselves, the National Assembly, or the National Constituent Assembly, as the legislative branch. The second phase is the radical phase. This is the phase that begins more or less with the death of the king, the trial and death of Louis XVI. Starts in 1793 and only lasts about a year and a half. And this is when the French Revolution becomes a republic. This is the most famous phase. This is the guillotine phase. This is the de-Christianization phase. This is the Jacobin phase, the Committee of Public Safety phase. This is the Reign of Terror phase. And even though it's really the shortest of the phases, it's really the most famous because this is the one everybody looks to and says, this is where everything went wrong. And they're right. This is the moment where everything sort of goes the other way, goes the wrong way. And so that is replaced by the Directory. The Directory stumbles along for about 4 years. This is an oligarchy. It is incredibly corrupt, but at least it's peaceful. Nobody's losing their heads under the Directory. The Directory is eventually overthrown by Napoleon Bonaparte, who establishes a military dictatorship. This is the part where France conquers most of Europe, and everybody else in Europe begins to say, hey, maybe this revolution thing is a bad thing. And so that's going to lead into the 19th century and the next video and the next sprite chart. All right, so let's move on to religion. So religion during this time period is assaulted in a big way. The Enlightenment tries to say that religion is intolerant, that it's superstition, that the leaders of the religious movement of Christianity are a bunch of liars. They push atheism, they push deism, but you got to remember that the Enlightenment is an intellectual movement. It involves a lot of people at the very top, which, you know, in the grand scheme of the population pyramid, is a really small section of the pyramid, that most of the people in this pyramid are going to remain faithful to whatever religion they're a part of, whether that be a Protestant faith or a Catholic faith. And you can see this with the de-Christianization that occurs during the French Revolution. De-Christianization, remember, is this huge separation, or causes this huge separation within the revolution between the people who are leading it in Paris and the people in the rest of the country. And this is a good illustration of the idea that there's a very small segment of the population that pushes this Enlightenment idea of intolerant superstition. And it's, you know, you see it again when Napoleon comes to power. He signs a concordat, an agreement with the Pope to bring back the French Catholic Church, and it helps to bring peace within the borders of France and bring an end to the Civil War that was at least in part caused because of de-Christianization. And so, as much as we talk about religion faltering during this time period, we really mean that religion is being attacked, but you know, the broader population is not moving away from Christianity by any means. Intellectually, we're talking the Enlightenment. We're talking about this huge intellectual movement to question society, to question human institutions. Similar to the Scientific Revolution, the Scientific Revolution wanted to question the physical world. The Enlightenment wants to question the human world. And so that is the huge intellectual movement of this time period, and it is the backbone, it is the foundation of a lot of modern political movements. By and large, this is spread through pamphlets, and so literacy remains incredibly important. And in a broad sense, the Enlightenment encourages individuality, individual equality. Again, it's sort of this pinnacle of humanism. And this is encouraged by guys like Voltaire, Rousseau, Beccaria, Wollstonecraft. Remember, Wollstonecraft is a woman. She's pushing for equality of men and women. We've got freedom of expression and thought. Remember, Voltaire is all about some freedom of expression, freedom of the press. Diderot, the publisher of Encyclopedia, wants freedom to print and to go to press with the ideas that are included in his encyclopedia. You've got Adam Smith, who pushes for economic freedom. You remember, this is him publishing with his book, The Wealth of Nations, which is going to encourage the death of mercantilism and the birth of capitalism and laissez-faire free trade capitalism. And you've also got the push for political participation and the reassessment of the political structure of Europe. Technologically speaking, we got one big movement and we got a lot of little ones. Artistically, we got the Rococo, the Neoclassical, and the Romantic, and they kind of go in line. The Rococo starts at about 1715. The Neoclassical is going to come with the Enlightenment. Remember, the Enlightenment is pushing Republican ideas, pushing Greek and Roman ideas, and so we're going with the Neoclassical, almost harkening back to the Renaissance style of art. And then you've got the Romantic, which brings about that emotional reaction that you see with the rising nationalism of the later French Revolution and the Napoleonic period. The printing press is huge still. The guillotine gets invented. You can't forget the guillotine, chopping people's heads off since like 1790 something. And of course the enclosure movement in Britain. I put this on here to illustrate the idea that the agricultural revolution is continuing forward. And remember that the enclosure movement in Britain is this movement where the large landholders of Britain start pushing the peasants off of their land. And so instead of having strips of land that are farmed, what you have is a big open field similar to what you would see in today's agricultural areas. And that greatly improves efficiency and brings a lot more land under cultivation in Europe. But the big movement is the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution is starting in Britain in the 1700s. We kind of saw this a little bit in the last video, but really it gets going in this video. Watt's steam engine is patented in 1769. The spinning jenny is patented in 1770. Remember, that one spins dozens of spools of yarn at a time. In 1785, the power loom is patented by Edmund Cartwright, and that speeds up the weaving process. In 1807, William Cockerell leaves Britain, sets up a machine shop in Belgium, which is going to spark the Industrial Revolution on the continent in a big way. And so the big technological movements of the mid to late 1700s are mostly happening in Britain with the Industrial Revolution. And we'll see that come to maturity in the next SPRITE chart in the early 19th century. Generally speaking, the wars of Napoleon delay industrialization on the continent until after 1815, but after 1815, many of the countries on the continent begin to industrialize rather quickly, especially France and the German states after they established that Zollverein. In Western Europe, you see industrialization happening before Eastern Europe, and this is mostly because of serfdom. Serfdom ties peasants to the land, makes it illegal for them to leave the land, so they can't travel to the cities to become that mobile workforce that is necessary to industrialize. Economically speaking, we'll just continue to riff off of that. This is still an era of mercantilism. This is the American Revolution. We talked about mercantilism as a reason for the American Revolution. So really, you're starting to see this transition away from mercantilism. Adam Smith publishes his Wealth of Nations, pushing for free trade and laissez-faire capitalism in 1776. And so that's going to take a few years to really take hold and gain support. And so we'll see that more in the early 19th century than in the late 18th century. But the big thing is that the bourgeoisie are rising. They are continuing to make money. They are continuing to encourage trade. And they are breaking the system, right? They are breaking the mold because they're not in the first estate, they're not in the second estate, technically they're in the third estate, but they don't look like anybody else in the third estate. So that's the big one of the big economic pushes or changes during this era. And so that wraps it up for this one. That's the SPRITE chart for the basically for the whole of the 1700s, for the whole 18th century. And so remember, your AP Euro exam is on May 13th at 4 p.m. I encourage you to take care of yourself, wash your hands, send me memes and songs. If you got any questions, email me, hit me up on Remind, message me on Classroom. I will do my best to answer as soon as I can. I hope you all are staying well and safe, and I will see you again soon. I hope. See ya.